All right. Welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be continuing our leadership series, and tonight will be leadership in the digital age. So Jeff, take it away.
Well, good evening, everyone, or good morning, I guess, depending upon where some of you are. This is going to be a fun session, and we're really going to do this digital age subject in at least two parts, at least tonight and then 2 weeks from now. It might take us longer. The digital age is going to keep going for quite a while until somebody thinks of something better. But we kind of need to walk up to it, and then we're going to really kind of walk to the edge, and then and take care of some of the kind of really most important things that I've seen about it. And I'm also really interested in getting your perspectives. And then we're going to dive into it based upon some amazing research that's been done by folks at MIT and some authors that we will then begin with that 2 weeks from now. So if I might, today is my father's birthday, and he would have been 97 today. He passed away a few years ago, and he was an avid golfer. And so I was, by extension, a novice golfer. He cut off a 5-iron and let me follow him around on the golf course, when I was about 6 or 7 years old. But I want to tell you his favorite story that I ever told about playing golf with him that is also directly relevant to the subject of this evening. And it's this. I'd never beaten my father in a round of golf. I had gotten to the point where I could have, and he was certainly old enough where, but it just never happened. And he and I took a trip together about 10 years ago to Scotland and Ireland, and we played 14 times. So we played 13 times in 14 days in Scotland and Ireland. We played all the great courses, and it was all arranged by him, and we stayed at bed and breakfast, and we had caddies at every course, and I'd never had a caddy anywhere. I'd been his caddy when he won the Minnesota State Amateur Tournament when he was a young man. And we got to the fourth course we played, which was Royal County Down in Northern Ireland, always ranked as one of the top 10 courses in the world. And I explained to the caddy there that this was the fourth of 13 courses that my father and I were going to play together, and I'd never beaten him in a round of golf. And I was really hoping sometime during this trip that might happen. And I think my father might have been hoping that too, but he certainly wasn't going to just make it happen. And so the caddy said, I get it. I'll give you my best advice. And sort of, I can't do the Northern Irish accent very well, but even though our family was from Ireland, and you'd think I would be able to do that. So for those of you who don't know, the only thing you need to know about this story is the number of a club is an indication of how far the ball goes when you hit it with that club. So for example, a 2-iron goes a lot farther than an 8-iron. An 8-iron kind of goes up in the air, and a 2-iron goes straight out farther and much longer. So my dad and I are getting through these first several holes, and wouldn't you know it, by the fourth hole, I'm already one down. You win a hole, and then you go on to the next hole, and you play the next hole. So we get to the fourth hole, and I hit a nice long drive out into the fairway, and my dad hits a good shot, and we walk out there, and we look to the left, and this is kind of a dog leg left. It curves, the hole curves to the left, and there's a pond between us and the green that goes right up to the green. So I said to my caddy, I said, this is, I told you how important it is for me to play well, here, and so let me ask for your best advice. What club do people usually hit from here? And he said, people usually hit the 7-iron. And I said, okay. So I took out a 7-iron and I put a perfect swing on it, and the ball went up against the gray Irish sky and landed 20 yards short, splash in the water. So I looked at the caddy and said, "No, wait a minute. I told you how important it was for me to play here, play well here, and I asked you what club people usually hit, and you told me people usually hit a 7-iron, and I hit a perfect 7-iron. My ball landed in splash in the water." And he looked at me and he said, "They usually do." So the moral of that story is obviously that the quality of the advice you get, and maybe the answers you get if you're asking yourself, are directly related to the quality of the questions you ask. And so in honor of my father, and in honor of asking better questions, which we're heading towards in this evening session. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, which is another joke. It's another story, which we'll get to someday. So this evening, we're going to do just a quick review for those, especially for those for whom this is the first time, and of the kind of the future of leadership moving forward together, because you kind of have to make sure that we're all on the same page there. And then we're going to look at some survey data from a book called The Future Leader by Jacob Morgan, who's a prolific author on this subject. And then I'm going to present a series of frameworks here for thinking about how this plays out and relates to some of the most important things about leadership in the digital age. And then we're going to do a little exercise where we come up with the best questions that we can, so we get better answers than I got on that golf course in Northern Ireland. By the way, my dad and I played 13 courses. We got to the last course, and we were all tied after 17 holes. And we got to the 18th hole, and I hit a drive out there, and he hit it within 6 feet of me. And I hit my ball up about 6 feet off the green, and he hit his about 10 feet off the green. And so I hit my ball up on the green first, and it was a good shot, landed about 8 feet away from the hole. And my dad hit his ball up on the green and landed about 3 feet from the hole, which I had been watching him do my entire life. Of course, I missed my putt and he made his, and we were betting £1 per round. So he won that £1. And a couple of years later, when we were cleaning out his house, he pulled it out and he said, "I thought you might like to have this." So I still have that £1, although I wasn't able to win it. So the fundamental question is, in this complex and fast-changing world, how can mature leadership help us to authentically and ethically and inclusively and creatively and productively keep moving forward together in this digital age? And we're going to explore this in civil society and beyond, current politics and issues of the day, even though I'm up to my eyeballs in that every day, and adopt as much of a beginner's mind, as the Buddhists like to say, as we can bring ourselves to adopt, even if we know a great deal about some of these subjects. We'll consider and discover all ideas and possible approaches, and we will respect diverse perspectives and prize best questions, which we'll focus on, especially here in the end, over what I like to say are tentative conclusions. So I'll remind you of this list because it really does undergird leadership in the past and in the present and in the future. And as we get to this research here from the Future Leader book by Jacob Morgan, these are the things largely that people are talking about as they answer those questions. So remember that as Marshall Goldsmith said, leadership is working through, with and through others, with the key word being others, and helping people learn from everyone around them, so that you can kind of hold and cultivate a space for others to do their best work. A space being an organization, being a team, being an agency, being a movement, whatever that space is. Leaders hold a space for people to learn and disagree and try things out and make mistakes and resolve their disagreements long enough to decide what to do at least next and learn from it and progress from there. One of the things that has been learned in every age of leadership, and especially now, is that emotional intelligence is more important than ever. And it turns out that it's one of the most important things in the digital age. That while there are lots of things that make the analysis of information and the framing of it according to categories and criteria that that we set and are led to, the ability to relate to each other in a way that inspires trust and confidence in each other, and the ability to disagree productively is actually a little harder in this online framework. And so emotional intelligence is one of the things that I'll be covering here, because it turned out to be one of the most significant things and one of the most difficult things, as it turns out, for people working in a virtual environment. So if you'll recall, this is this fundamental kind of diagram where inside this container, if you will, is vision and mission and the purpose that we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to do, and what we hope to get from achieving it. You may want to go to college, go to good college, and get good grades, because on the other side, what you imagine is a good paying job that is also adequately challenging and fulfilling. And then principles and ethics are essential. So, and there are folks from time to time playing various leadership roles, sometimes positionally, often situationally, which turns out to be even more important these days. There are stakeholders, as in partners and teams, and there are decisions and actions to be taken. But the key orientation to that is that every decision and every action is based on tentative conclusions, and therefore are experiments from which we will learn. So this seemed like a fairly simple little diagram. As it turns out, in my experience using it with folks around the world these days, it's more complex than any of us have been able to handle so far. So we'll keep coming back to it. These four variables, the entity, who we are, who our teams and partners and stakeholders and competitors and customers and investors and everybody, and the things that we decide to do in a fast changing world, with opportunities and challenges that maybe we've never seen before, require us to maintain this learning posture. And yet doing that, especially in a virtual environment, turns out to be, it can be a challenging and also quite rewarding endeavor. So there's a few interesting pieces of information, and the sources for all this information are in the book, and so I'm not citing them individually, but that by 2030 there'll be roughly 87 to 437 million kind of leader managers in workplaces and of workers around the world. And it's a rough calculation. It assumes somewhere between 6 and maybe 20 people being kind of the span of a leader manager's sphere of influence. And so it's a big number, but at the very least, it's about 100 million people, and probably more like at least 200 million. Now, interestingly enough, and this is not a surprise, I'm sure, to those of you here, that 60% of employees in the US say they've left their jobs or are considering leaving, and this could very well be part of the great resignation, as they say, because they don't like their direct supervisors. They say most people leave a job because of their managers. That half of Americans have left a job at some point in their careers to get away from their managers, even just to improve the person's overall quality of life. And 13% of this is another US number, I think, of employees say their bosses are dangerously incompetent in their jobs. And only around the world, in global surveys, only 15% of employees around the world say that they are really fully engaged in their work. Those are fairly astounding numbers, really. In addition, that 42% of managers said that the overall quality of leadership in their organizations was high, and half said that their leaders are not skilled to lead their organizations effectively right now, and 71% said they're not ready to lead their organizations into the future. Wow. And that 14% of managers said their organizations have a strong cadre of leaders who can replace those who retire or move on. So there's not a lot of bench strength here in terms of folks who are ready to take things on in the next iteration of the challenges and opportunities before us. And 71% of millennials said that they expect that they are expecting to leave their current job or employer in the next 2 years because they're unhappy with how their leadership skills are being developed. So this is a little bit like, if we were driving a bus and the engine light came on and the overheating came on and the brake light came on and we're running out of gas and all of that was happening, and we said, we'll be okay, just keep driving, don't do anything, just drive, and the problem is that we're all in the bus, and so this is quite a case to consider some major changes here with regard to what we do and what we're trying to achieve in this era. So one of the key ways to think about leadership in every respect, but there are a number of them here in this, and so I'm going to go through a number of them. And I've pretended that I really am doing this with you all in a real place, and I can draw on this whiteboard. And so this is my drawing on the whiteboard with myself or with you, in the middle. And you have your relationships with the team that you work with, and then that team has relationships with others throughout an organization, and then and all of the different folks who do various things in the organization, and then there's an ecosystem of partners and investors and regulators and everything that's in the environment. And then of course there's the world, however you conceive it, beyond. So this is very simple, but just a kind of a sphere of influence. The biggest sphere of influence we have is actually ourselves, and those with whom we work closely. And then through what we do and through what we do with that closely held team, we can influence what happens in an organization and with our partners and in the world. So the team of teams idea, which is another way to look at it, was what General Stanley McChrystal wrote about. And obviously there's, we're one team in the middle, and then everybody on this team, the other three folks, and we are part of other teams. And then clearly it quickly goes and expands from there. So our ability to do this successfully has an exponential effect and can happen very quickly in terms of morale and strategy and energy and hope, or fear and anger and frustration. So it's very important that that we do this well at every level and on every one of these teams, because they keep going out from there. This is actually a pretty small organization when you think about it. So in a large organization, it spreads very, very fast. So next, just as a framework, is I'm a big fan of this Cynefin framework that was created by Dave Snowden when he was at IBM Global Services. And it really goes from bottom right up and then over and then to bottom left. So there are problems and opportunities that we face in what we're doing in every environment. And there may be a known and repeatable approach to either address that problem successfully or seize that opportunity. And we know what it is. This would be the example. It may not be easy. This may be the example of the 50 to 100 piece puzzle, but we know the picture and we have the pieces and we've done it before and we can do it again. So above that is what one might think of as complicated. So the approach and the solution and the way to seize that opportunity, it's knowable. We don't necessarily know it, but we know that it is known. And it's repeatable, it's been tested, and it can be trusted. And so that might be the 1,000-piece puzzle. And we may have most of the picture in our minds, or maybe the whole picture. And we don't know how it all fits together at that moment, but we can discover it and the puzzle can be put together. It's been put together before, maybe even by us, maybe by somebody else. We can research it, we can get the information, and we can actually, we can do it. Now, top left is what Snowden called complex. And that's where the approach here is really unknown. As far as we know, it's unknown. It's not been faced before. And if it has been faced, it was faced maybe a long, long time ago, and we're not really sure exactly what's the best way to handle it. A little bit like, they didn't have vaccines for coronaviruses. And the last time we had a global pandemic, anything like what we've experienced in the last year or two, was 100 years ago. So exactly what to do and how to handle it, both in terms of the creation of the vaccines, as well as how to handle it in society and in terms of medical procedure and practice and policy and the politics of it all. A lot of things here that we're just kind of learning as we go along. And so it had to be created, and in the context of a team, it actually had to be co-created, which turns out to be a dramatically more complicated thing than even just one person creating something individually. There's a design culture inside of each of us, and that's pretty complex in and of itself. As soon as we extend that design culture to many more of us, even a few more of us, and then maybe a lot more of us, it gets way more complex. And so the ability to handle that, even if the problem itself was relatively static, is a challenge. There are losses, there are gains, there's competition, there's disagreement. There are many experiments to be tried. Many of them will not work. We need to learn, not just to think of them as something we can learn from, but we need to learn the right things from them, which actually turns out to be a pretty big challenge sometimes. Learn things that make us stronger and more capable and able to keep moving forward. And then you add the bottom left that whatever we're facing is dynamic. It's not static. It's changing. Everything might be changing. The problem or opportunity itself could be changing. The environment in which it happens can be changing. Our partners could be changing. Our stakeholders could be changing. We could be changing. We could be changing we could even be modifying the purpose that we think we're trying to achieve, much less the benefits we're trying to get from it in response to a fast changing environment and really an unpredictably changing environment where our scenarios for both best and worst case feel inadequately predictable. And so not only do we have to be vigilant, but we have to sort of manage our relationships inside of ourselves and how we talk to ourselves about it, as well as our relationships with each other and those beyond just us. So it gets to be exponentially more challenging. And I found this to be extremely useful with some of the folks that I've been working with as a way of thinking about the nature of the challenge we're facing and what it might take to successfully address it. For things that are on that, in those left top and bottom boxes, there's a phrase that I'm sure most of you have heard before called adaptive leadership. It was coined, as far as I know, by these two professors at Harvard, Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky, and they've been teaching leadership at Harvard for, I think, 2 decades. And the only ones that I ever went to were standing room only. It is quite remarkable what they've done. And so leadership on the line, surviving and the dangers of leadership, and leadership without easy answers. They're just really wonderful. And the person that I really heard advance this idea of the container, the first time I heard it, I'd never really heard it before, was Marty Linsky. And he was really talking about containers within which people can disagree in order to refine thinking and decide which things we're going to experiment with, why, what we hope to learn, and then deal with all the surprises that will come up. But adaptive leadership is, in essence, mobilizing people to handle difficult challenges. And they talked us in a little bit in the way that the Cynefin framework does as well. They said that there are some challenges that have what they called a technical approach to solving them, or opportunities that can have a technical approach to being able to seize them as opportunities. And that technical means we know what to do. But more and more, the kinds of challenges and opportunities that we're facing require an adaptive approach. They have to be invented. We have to ask the best questions we can, because in large measure, whatever we decide to do, as in experiment with, and whatever we decide to learn from it, given the various things we might seek to learn as we try to keep moving forward and make progress with tough challenges, so they coined this idea of adaptive leadership, people who really can lead in times of change and lead change. And they would have been big fans of Shrikant's quotes of Louis Sullivan, as in form following function, and the need to explore function as well, not assume that function is clear, but to really explore function in order to then be able to explore forms. So when we come to leadership in the digital age, and this is a bit of a, I've done a lot of examination and exploration of this based upon the work of Hal Gregerson at MIT, who is a phenomenal coach of folks and CEOs throughout the world, and is now a wonderful support by asking incredibly thoughtful questions to everybody trying to pursue everything related to leadership and team building and organizational development in the digital age. And he draws a diagram a little bit like this, where he says, you know, um, uh, the experience of the digital age as we're discovering it is a little bit like going to live overseas, taking advantage of some opportunity to live and work in a completely different country and culture. And you first get there, and it's sort of intriguing, and the food is interesting, and the people and the customs and all that. And then it kind of sinks in how little you really know here that's under the surface. And it gets harder, and you miss where you were from, and it just gets harder. And gradually then you adapt so that ultimately you survive and thrive. Well, applying that to the digital age, where first of all, there were all these interesting inventions, the computers we could take with us, and the phones, and then the smartphones that we could take with us that put the entire internet into the palm of our hands. And the idea of Facebook as a way of building relationships and sharing with family and friends and others, and Twitter as a way to even just in this limited number of characters, share what you're thinking and what questions you might wish to pose, and having these conversations with the whole world. And then LinkedIn as a way of putting yourself out there to be able to engage in various business opportunities and get hired for jobs and market yourself and all that. It all turned out, it seemed great. And then gradually, as we got into it, there are all these things that began happening, automation, and the internet started to actually do a lot of jobs that were previously being held by a lot of different people. And folks got addicted to their smartphones and to the internet and to Facebook and Instagram and all that. And that didn't turn out to be such a great thing. And this incredible immediate communication, where all of a sudden everybody's a journalist, as in everybody's a journalist, and the ability to do unethical things and intentionally deceive, much less make mistakes with information that we put out there, and all the things that have come up about Instagram and Facebook, and especially younger people getting kind of depressed as they compare themselves to others. And we all know all about it. And the anger that is easily stoked. So challenges came along. And where we are now is we're seeking to begin adapting. We're adaptive leadership, adaptive practice as we handle both challenges and opportunities that for us are largely unprecedented. And so we're not exactly sure what to do. And we need people in leadership roles who can actually not just be kind of orchestra conductors, because there really is no score here, and we're not even sure exactly what the right instruments are, much less how long the concert is for. And so it's a little messier than the metaphor of an orchestra conductor and an orchestra. It's as if it all has to be created in a brave new world here. And so we had this experience of virtual work and meetings like this, where those of us who have never met each other otherwise get a chance to interact with each other. And now there's this this switch now to in many instances to hybrid work, and this is really going to be a pretty big change. And it turns out that in some ways, the switch to hybrid work may even be more challenging than the initial shift to virtual work. And it's just kind of interesting to see the way that's going along. So the leadership in the digital age is adaptive in every way, even by way of purpose and what we're doing and what we hope to gain from it, much less stakeholder engagement and involvement and input and feedback and co-creating. In fact, really, I think that we are now in more of a co-creating age, quite potentially, than humanity has ever imagined or experienced. And I don't think we're all that ready for it. And the folks that we're counting on to lead it are often not really ready for it. And so it really is an adventure. So a big part of this is, and this has always been true, but a big part of successful leadership in an adaptive age, especially, is the extent to which people serving in leadership roles, either by position or in various situations with regard to their teams, are self-aware, like they know what's going on with them. They have a sense. We know what's going on with us. We have a sense of our explicit and implicit conversation inside of ourselves, what Brian McBee likes to call mental interiority. And that conversation can serve us, or it can not serve us. It can make us be able to really think about things and consider them and make decisions and interpret the world around us in such a way that that it allows us to make progress, or it can paralyze us, or it can even move us to do things that are self-defeating or self-destructive. So this first point here of self-awareness is probably the most powerful line on the whole chart because it never goes away. So they say the conversation we're having with ourselves is probably the most important conversation we'll have all day. And then what Goleman called self-regulation. I don't really like the word regulation. I think of it more as influence. But nonetheless, the ability to even to do the things that we know we should do and not do the things that we know we should not, in order to be able to make progress as individuals, is really essential here. And then, of course, in relationship with each other, the extent to which we can become aware of other people, which is this huge focus on empathy as a way of generating trust, as a way of being able to serve people, as a way of people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, as a way of being able to do unto others as they would like to be done unto, as opposed to only doing unto others as you would like to have done unto you, because they're not you, and they might not want the same things that you wish. And so this ability to discover what people need and wish for, and then serve them with really service as the heart of design, and then build the relationships, build the trust, build the interdependence and the reliance and the confidence that people will follow through and that they'll do the right thing, even at cost to themselves, turns out to be huge with anybody that you want to co-create anything, much less when you're in a highly adaptive age where there's so much at stake. And so the ability to be aware of yourself and manage and influence yourself, that top right star, and then the ability to actually come to know the folks that you're trying to serve and hoping to influence, and how to build relationships based on trust across the world. That, first of all, number one factor with regard to what we want from our leaders is essential. And as simple as that diagram looks like, it's way more challenging than you imagine. When managers are surveyed regularly with regard to how they place themselves, say on a scale of 1 to 10 with regard to self-awareness, and they place themselves up there fairly high, maybe let's say a 7 or 8, and then their direct reports are surveyed with regard to how self-aware they think their managers are. It's routinely 1 or 2, and it is the highest difference of factors like that when they're surveyed, the highest difference in people's perception and how they're perceived, is this part of self-awareness. So the ability to invite input and feedback and then take it seriously, even though it might be wrong, in order to explore not only ourselves, but how we're being, how whatever we're doing is being perceived is a big step. So we'll pause there for a second, and I want to employ something that Hal Gregerson has coined here to be a question burst. One of his books is "Questions Are the Answer," and it's really that the answer to many questions is looking for a better question. And with folks that he's worked with around the world, especially incredibly busy folks inside of companies and government and nonprofits, and he said they're so busy, they hardly have time for the coaching sessions that they're paying him a lot of money to provide for them. He says, well, have you got a minute? And they say, yeah, I guess I got 1 minute. He says, all right, we're going to stop, and for 1 minute, I want you to write down on this subject we've been discussing, whatever it happens to be, as many questions as you can write down in 1 minute, because everybody's got a minute. And usually it goes for 2, and the person writes them down. And when they write them down, it turns out that that's a huge step forward from just talking about them, which sometimes, is a kind of analysis by paralysis or a circular conversation that just keeps going round and round and never really gets anywhere. And he finds that by the time people have asked themselves, say 5 to 10 questions about whatever they're facing, they know a lot more about it. And they often do know what they'd like to try out next, so that when they reflect on the results of that experiment, they might be in a position to learn things that can serve them as well as others. And this actually works quite well with teams as well, to just stop and have everybody on the team take 2 minutes and write down as many questions as you can in 10 minutes. And then let's hear the questions and come to some opinion regarding which ones maybe need to be addressed first, and which ones we can address next, and maybe which ones later, in order to use our time as best we can in that meeting. And so when coaching teams, this turns out to be, as ridiculously simple as it is, a phenomenally productive exercise. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to have, I want to give you all 2 minutes. And I hope you have a piece of paper and a writing instrument there of some kind. And I just want to pause for 2 minutes. And with regard to this subject of leadership in the digital age, all of the technological aspects of it, all the relational aspects of it between you and other folks, and everything having to do with your own personal quest, your own personal adventure with this, either with people who are serving in leadership roles that you are, who are trying to serve you, or people that you're trying to serve. What questions do you think really deserve to be addressed? And there's no, there are really no boundaries to this. It's really what occurs to you as potentially interesting and possibly useful.
Okay, folks. So we'll take 2 minutes. Is that about right?
Yeah, let's just take 2 minutes.
Okay.
And we'll tell people when there's 90 seconds left. So 90 seconds, and then when there's 30 seconds left. So 90 seconds, and we'll tell you, maybe at 1 minute and 30 seconds, and then we'll stop, and then we'll take it from there.
Sounds good.
Ready, set, go.
Yep. Welcome back, everybody. So would anybody like to offer some of their questions?
Yeah, either a question that that you shared or that somebody else shared that seemed to be important or intriguing to you, or maybe any point that anyone made, either yourself or another person that you thought was particularly useful or important. And if we could do, for each of us, if we could maybe do that within about 2 minutes, that would be great, so that then we can talk about it a little bit. Who'd like to go first?
I can go first. Or go
Well,
ahead.
we
No,
we have
Lisa,
a
Lisa, go right ahead, please. Oh, you're muted.
I'm really interested in forming a more concrete understanding of empathy. So I really liked Laura, her question, should we be using a different word other than empathy to describe that emotion?
Yeah, because it is sort of a widely used word at the moment as being so important. You know, what do we mean by it?
Right.
Anybody have a thought about that? Laura, maybe you could say a little bit more by way of explaining it, since you originated the question.
And you're muted, Laura, sorry. Need to unmute.
You'll need to unmute,
There
Laura.
we
There you
go.
are.
I did. I brought it up because of the overuse of it, because people always say I have empathy. And I was brought up to believe that you had empathy for someone when you yourself had a same experience, then you could truly feel it. And that otherwise you feel sympathy for someone's situation. Jeff made a comment about using the word validating, which I felt sort of fit better for empathy than empathy. Validating is someone's feelings or so forth. Although validating is not a very nice word in that context, but something that means validating. So I think we have to hit this thesaurus and come up with something. But I don't know. For me, validating is a powerful emotional word that you share with somebody on a because you have a relationship with someone. It's a more personal word, and we're not talking about personal situations here. We're talking about business situations. So I think the vocabulary ought to reflect that.
Yes, Robert.
I would just say recognizing where, I don't have a single word, recognizing where other people are at.
I would say perhaps understanding through compassion.
I like that. Very well said. Shane Marie.
This is different, but I was thinking when Jeff spoke of his father, he mentioned this legitimate desire of his father to have Jeff supersede him, like legitimately. And so, Jeff, how do we infuse that into leadership where there is, like, it's not your offspring? How in a competitive environment, how do we encourage leaders to have that sense of like, I naturally want someone to supersede me legitimately, where I've been a sufficient teacher, and at some point in time, they go beyond what I've taught them. So that's my question, is how do you achieve that where there's no familial linkage there that allows people to feel that for others?
Well, I can tell you how it happened by surprise with me. Never underestimate the power of a sabbatical. Not only for well, you think they're sabbaticals for you, but it actually turns out to be a pretty useful thing for the folks that you leave there to take care of it all. And when you come back, it won't be the same place. And there's no going back. And so it's sort of kind of a funny thing, really. When I took a sabbatical, it was only for, I think, 4 months. And that was actually when my dad and I went to play golf. So that's what made me think of it. 3 people had decided to train each other in doing their jobs, and they actually switched jobs while I was away. I came back and different people were doing different jobs. And that, so And there were a lot of things that were different, but that was one that surprised me. And the funny thing was that they'd done it based upon a thing that I had introduced, which was what called strength-based leadership, where people discover their natural talents. And they looked at their talents and they even put them up on their door, you know, their 5 strengths. And then they said, you know what, I think I'd rather do your job. And then it fit because there were 3 people who changed jobs. And so it wasn't just the trade. Nobody took, you know, the person that you took their job, they didn't take yours. It was actually a trade between 3 of them. But they got it done before I came back.
Interestingly enough, something that had come up in our room, actually, and I raised it, so it's selfish in that we talked about the curve that you showed when it came to the idea of, you know, going digital, where you initially saw the benefits and then it went down to the challenges, and then you're trying to adapt to you know, the new normal, or I forget what exactly it was called, the hybrid work, you know. And what were like, what are some of the challenges that we're now faced with? And even how do you even, there was even a question about boundaries, but I don't know how to form that as well. But what are some of the challenges? You listed some, but you know, I know you recently spoke to some professors at MIT about this, and you know, would like to hear a little bit more about that in particular.
I'm wondering if Tom has any thoughts about that as a student of organizational change.
Sorry, opinion about what precisely? I'm not sure. What?
Well, so for example, Tom, that you know, the whole, so much of the knowledge workers, certainly in the world, you know, just went through the huge shift to everybody working from home, you know, with their dogs and their children and everybody else. And then, okay, so just as we're getting used to that, then it seems, certainly here in New York, that a lot of CEOs of major companies want either everyone to come back, or they want to institute some form of hybrid work, you know, where people are in the office, you know, 1 to 3 days a week, which is a whole additional change.
Okay, now I see the bent of your question. I'll offer an opinion. I don't think it matters, because I think the essential idea of leadership is that there's some kind of a, let's call it a vision. You know, our company needs to get better in X type vision. And the vision is the one that unifies people, motivates people, and tells them whether they're making progress. So I'm a fan of, let's call it clearly stated objectives or visions, which can be done by leaders, or leaders can get people at lower levels to formulate those ideas, right? So I think it's the vision leads people, and that's the essential idea. And then at that, but we have a lot of very unclear objectives and visions floating around everybody's organization. That's my specialty. That's what I've written a lot on and analyzed. Not least, I've written one about United Nations sustainability goals and what a mess of unclear visions they are, right? So if you have unclear visions, it doesn't help if you're very empathetic and nice and everybody loves you. The organization is not going to go anywhere because it's not defined where they're going to go, okay? So we have to have a clear notion of vision. It can be vague and it can be general. You know, we just have to be very superior to our competitors in the next decade. Is that generic enough for you, Jean-Marie? But there has to be some notion of vision. Then the empathy and other things come into play, helping the teams solve the problems and feel good about being there. And I don't think it matters whether they're in an office or at home at all.
Tom, would you just say one more word, since you wrote a book about it, about sort of what contributes to objectives being clear, you know, whether they're originated by stakeholders, if you will, or whether they're originated by leaders, if you will, or some partnership.
Okay, give you the short version, and we can share my books freely digitally amongst everybody here who wants them. But let's take the sustainability objectives of United Nations. That's an interesting case, right? By the way, who is the great leader of the United Nations? Is it the Secretary General? I don't think so. Okay. But they're trying to put out a form of leadership there called the sustainability goals. Number one, reduce hunger, and number two, better education and that kind of thing. Now, I analyzed them and I wrote a little book called Sustainability Planning, which everybody can have a free copy of if they want it. And what I found was that and very systematically exposed, was the goals were fluffy, nothing new there. We see it all the time, at the level of save the world from hunger. That's it. And then you get problems like save. What does that mean? The world, what part of the world? Hunger. What's that? I mean, 3 words in a row, and they're like a tremendous ambiguity, right? And it gets worse. They then say, save the world from hunger by, I don't know, making self-sufficient communities in African villages. What they're doing there, they haven't actually put out a vision for what we're going to do, what we're going to achieve. They've put out a vision for how we're going to achieve it, a strategy, which could be a very bad idea or a very expensive idea or something like that. So the second thing I find after just unclear goals is plugging in specific strategies for getting to objectives that are not even clearly defined. So you couldn't even decide if that strategy was any good. Okay, now one more thing and then I'll shut up. The other thing I found is that people are constantly stating goals that have degrees of like better security, lower hunger. And time again, they use words, but they don't use numbers. Okay. Now, or they use bad numbers. They use numbers like in the hunger thing. They don't talk about how hungry people are. They talk about minimum daily income, which is, a very bad metric for how hungry a person is. Although there's, arguably a relationship. So what I found is all these things we're going to improve. It's critical that we quantify them. It's critical that we define a really good, relevant scale of measure. I mean, a hunger scale for hunger and not an income scale for hunger. Okay. And then we use that as a tool to communicate clearly the degree of hunger reduction we're going to do. Now, that's the short version. And I have several 100-page books I'm willing to give anybody who wants to read them on the subject, and I'll shut up.
How could people get a hold of those?
Okay. You see the email in my, if you write me an email saying, send me that book about the UN stuff, you'll get it. I mean, you'll get it before I go to bed tonight, and it's 2:30 in the morning here.
Here's what I can promise you. Tom really means it. He's already sent me 3. And,
yes.
and they're amazing. They're amazing.
That was just this evening. That was just this evening while you were talking. Yeah, I do that.
And they were wonderful books. Yeah, they are. They are wonderful books. They address some of the most important issues. One in particular is how do you determine what your values are, value system, which is actually, I found in most organizations that they never really determine what value is. Right. And so their goals and objectives are all perverted because their goals and objectives are essentially just in a vacuum, and they're not necessarily getting to what they determine to be value.
So Tom, you're addressing exactly what Lisa raised in our small group, was sort of the definition of success in these different spheres, right, Lisa?
Okay. Well, by the way, I have good news. I just wrote a book for a friend of mine called Success, which is a series of tactics for succeeding in reaching well-stated objectives. So Lisa can have that book if she asks for it. It's a secret book. I'm not publishing it.
Shane, you've had your hand up for a while. Were you trying to get trying to say something, Shane Marie?
Yeah,
or is it just your hand was just up?
No. So, and maybe I'm misunderstanding Tom. And Tom, please, I would love to know more if you're saying that. But so, I imagine that unclear goals are bad for some people, like for people who need step by step. This is the goal. This is the aim. This is what we're going to do. And then I imagine for other people, if you have a loosely defined goal, those certain people can get very creative with that. Like it grants them the freedom to consider and to explore, as opposed to somebody else's specific goals that has specific steps. So I'm wondering if there's a personality that suits clear goals and less clear goals. And maybe, Tom, you've already accounted for that, but I don't know.
Okay, I'll try to be
Go ahead, Tom.
brief here, but I have to respond. Now, by the way, there is a distinction between ambiguous, like nobody can figure out what it means, and general, which gives you a scope. So I love to cite, like, for example, President Kennedy or Churchill in my books, who were great at giving a broad scope, people to the moon and back within the decade. And they didn't tell NASA exactly how to do it. They gave NASA scope to figure it out. Okay. So there, in other words, great leaders give scope for people below them to solve the problem. Bad leaders give ambiguous, muddled things where they have no clear idea of what they're saying and confuse everybody.
Could you say also that bad leaders give too much description for some people, where it's like they want people to toe the line and it's too prescriptive? That would be my only suggestion. I totally understand what you're saying. My suggestion would be that some things can be too prescriptive for some people. It doesn't allow for the ingenuity and creativity. That's all I'm curious about. Thank you.
Big thumbs up for Shea Marie from Tom. Laura. I'm sorry.
I think Lisa, you
Lisa,
were about
yes.
to say something. Okay, you got in what you needed to say.
I was just agreeing with all this great information and shaking my head and writing it down.
All right, fantastic.
Lisa, it's kind of amazing, Lisa, these answers to your question in our small group. Who knew that we could have gotten that far on a very complex question? Allison, did you want to join in there and say something about that, or?
I think,
yeah, I think that
And then
sometimes
Laura?
stifles some of us, and we don't, and I push back against, I don't like it at all.
Right.
I actually just today had a bunch of people observing my class, and somebody was like, this kid got in trouble because he didn't understand the objective, and he knew what he was supposed to do, but he couldn't like repeat the objective or didn't say it correct. Actually couldn't pronounce the word. And the visitor was all upset because he couldn't, pronounce the word. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, this kid hasn't been in school in 1.5 years. Cut him a break. I mean, like, he's just figuring out how to put on shoes and show up on time at this point. Like, I don't know. I understand. I feel like you have to have an objective for what you're doing. But when it becomes like a call and response, parrot, repeat thing about the objective, it's actually taking away from the actual objective. The goal is to get to the objective, but not this rote, like repeat it. I don't think that serves any purpose really, except it's like
Right.
It's just micromanaging. It's too much.
Yeah.
so,
Is there anyone who hasn't yet joined in? I want to give anybody who hasn't yet spoken, the full group, the chance to join in.
I haven't spoken.
yeah, Laura would like to speak.
Great, Laura.
Okay, I think I'm not sure I remember what I was going to want to speak before, so I'll go with Allison's comment. In terms of that kind of thing, when I had objectives for my class, and that applied to everyone, but how I did it was I took the objective and I looked at each student and I looked at how that objective would apply to that particular student, knowing what the student's issues were. So objective kind of changed with respect to the student. So that's how I deal with that kind of thing. I individualize the objective, and it's not downing, not making it less for that person. It's just altering it so it fits, so that you're not, giving the kid trouble for not being able to say a word or having difficulty being able to, do something, like presenting to the class or wasn't able to finish it in time because they're slower for some reason, or they're not a good reader, or so that you take into consideration the issues. And then, if the kid within their scope can do the thing, then they get the credit of having been able to meet the task. And so
For those of you who might not know, Laura was a math teacher for a couple of
College.
decades. So
Yeah.
so she's thinking about teaching math with that orientation.
In college, in remedial math, where kids who really, have been beaten down by, the system, not knowingly, but, and are perfect examples of a society in schools where there were very low expectations for these kids, low expectation for the teachers, and just a horror at what we've done and continue to do. And frankly, if we don't make public schools, America make public schools great again, we'll never be great again.
Well, I would like to comment really quickly, if I could, on Laura, what Laura had just said. I think that really speaks to, kind of combines what Tom and Laura have been talking about, and everybody else as well. But the importance of, Laura had a value system, right? And then she had an objective that fit underneath that value system, which she understood, like the idea is education. That's the value. And how am I then going to educate? And then I'll actually have a goal of educating a class. Then an objective is this particular student. So it's a critical thing, because then you start to outline, what are you really trying to do for overall? And then what are you going to do for the individual student? And I think that that's the relationship that we were kind of talking about in our in our breakout room, because I think we've found that many times that leaders don't even necessarily determine their values more times than not, and they can't. So they determine their goals and their objectives, but not necessarily their values, and that's a problematic, and that would be really problematic in the digital age as well.
And I know things, because I've heard Laura and Allison talk about this in various ways, that the goal is both, the relative mastery of the subject, but also increasing the agency of the person to be able to have that experience in such a way that it gives them greater confidence and greater ability to then take on the next challenge. Because it's, and it's not one or the other, it's both and.
My advisor always used to say, where there's a way, there's a will. And I think that that's true. If we provide kids the way of learning and help them build that internal voice that they have to guide them through, then they have developed a way, and then they can conquer. And when they feel they can conquer, they have tremendous will to do so. Because when you give kids a vestedness in their process, in their learning, it takes them so far. They get so excited about it because they finally got the handle, they finally get it. And when they can finally get it, there's no stopping them. They're so proud of themselves finally, for once. I always tell the story of a kid who had failed remedial math multiple times and was now in my class. And I do these project-based problems, and I think one of them obviously was about hamburgers or something. Anyway, he drew all these pictures in this project for me of hamburgers and stuff. And I gave him like I don't give grades, I give check plus, check minus. And I gave him check plus plus on this project because it was really well done. Really, he wrote up the project, I was thinking. And he took that home to his father, and his father put that project up on the refrigerator, because this kid for the first time brought some work home that he could be proud of. Right. And that brings tears to me to think that this 20-year-old kid father put his math project on the refrigerator. I mean, that's what it's all about. That's the important thing, building confidence.
It is, and I mean, and that's why all teachers are leaders. So do we want to see if anybody else that hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet?
Yep. Anybody else like to join in? A question or a thought?
I have a story.
Well, Laura, let's let somebody else in just to see
Yeah.
if anybody else wants to join in first.
I had one comment that I wanted to make.
Uh-huh.
I think the thing that we really have to remember at this point is that kids haven't been in school for a year and a half. And some of those kids had moms who could either quit their jobs or were already housewives, and they helped them every single day with their work. Some kids went to work with their parents for a year and a half. Some kids were home alone for a year and a half. Some kids have parents who don't speak English well enough to be able to help them with the work because they can't read it. So we can't teach the same way that we taught a year and a half ago, because that pace of the curriculum just won't work. And you've got to adapt it based on all their levels, because you might teach one grade, but they're at completely different levels, much more so than they were 2 years ago. And that's something that has to be addressed and dealt with, you know.
Yeah, that was
So-
true. In a normal classroom, they had to do that. And then, as Becky's saying, add this, learning at home kind of thing to all the variations on the theme. I mean, it was brutal for teachers to develop curriculum that fit the situation for all the kids. And,
Well, I want to focus on get this trying back towards leadership specifically. So does anybody have any comments specific to leadership?
I'll just,
I don't
know, I keep going back to somehow there are examples of things that work, models that work. Jeff, talking about listening, things that work, and giving these more airtime. And I think TED Talks probably does some of this. Right now, there's a 60 days in jail thing where the cops who are trying to improve relations has these undercover people go in there and then come back with feedback about what works and what's not working. And the fact that that's on TV, it had me engaged for hours and hours. And then at the end of one of them, this one guy who decided he wasn't going to be a cop anymore because after he saw where he was sending these people and the disrespect and some of that, at the end of that show, they showed a community where this Andy Griffith type guy was doing things that made those relations work. And there's so much power, I think, in showing examples of things that work. It's inspiring to people. And I still agree. I suspect the same principles are at work as global, like universal laws of respect, and that they are existent within all of these models, but just getting them more airtime because it will bring out the light in people. That's all.
Could I say something in terms of leadership?
Please.
Yeah.
I keep thinking that there are people who pursue leadership for egoic reasons. And I think until we get people who legitimately pursue leadership for proper change, for proper direction, for proper aim, we'll be at a loss. And I think, unfortunately, most people pursue leadership for egoic reasons. And I just don't see a solution until we get around that and encourage. I think, like they say, people who want to lead, we don't want them to lead. And the people who don't want to lead, we want them to lead. And so I don't know how you navigate that, because I just don't know how we get the right people where we need them to be. I don't know.
Maybe we could change the debates to people trying to persuade us that they really don't want the job. Right. And asking people to not vote for them.
Along the lines of what Shane Marie was saying, I was thinking the same, like, how do we encourage a culture of leadership, accountability, and employee growth in the presence of opposing or competing interests? And it goes back to what you were saying, Jeff, about like so many people quit because they're quitting their managers. And I think for myself, 1 month into the job, that's what I wanted to do. And it was only a month in. And yesterday I had a situation where I was running late from a meeting, like an in-person meeting, trying to get back to the office. And I actually missed my meeting by half an hour. And I was calling to see what had happened because I couldn't get back in time. And I found out that one of the members from my project team took over, and she did a great job. She recorded the video so that I knew what was covered. She like led it, and I called her up and I thanked her. And she said something that really, I guess, touched me. She was like, well, I said she did a fantastic job. Thank you for taking the lead. And she said, well, it flows from the top. And I was like, oh, wow. Because I'm like a lone wolf usually, minus my project team. And I don't want to lead. Just because I've never had good leaders in the past. So I'm like, you know, my current manager, I can barely chat with him, but it's just like, going back to what Shane Marie said, it's like, I never want to be a leader, but then I got this compliment out of nowhere. But it's just a huge difference between those who want to lead and those who do. So.
Well, you know, Becky, probably, you know, I would guess, I mean, and just with a little bit, you know, that I and we have gotten to know you in this virtual environment, you're a person who contributes what it is that you can, you know, in a way that is intriguing and thoughtful, but you're very respectful of others and inviting of them. And so I'm sure that that's the way you are, you know, at work. And so that's basically what this person did, was you had modeled for them what this looked like. They felt respected by you. They felt that you'd have the confidence in them to be able to do this. And in an unspoken way, you were inviting them to step up and do it, even though you were not there to issue the invitation explicitly in person. And I think that's what they were telling you. And sometimes these days that gets called empowerment. But nonetheless, in the same way that Laura was giving a star to somebody who took it home and put it on their, the father put it on the refrigerator. I think each person having the ability to not just the ability to having the invitation and the confidence, and then the opportunity to be able to step up and do something that maybe they hadn't done before, at least in that environment. It's huge. It's huge. And I think it's become a little bit harder to do only in a virtual environment, because we don't quite have the same level of that interaction with each other. And so, you and I never met, but I could feel that from you, and I'm not the least bit surprised that a person would give you that feedback.
I agree.
Yeah. Well said. Very well said. Does anybody else have anything they would like to add before we close? Laura.
Well, I'll tell a quick story. When I was young, I had a job in a place called whatever. It was a mom and pop shop that grew out of the 40s and the labor union people. And they represented the sanitation union. So that was a big client. And mom and pop, Pop was the head and mom was the VP. And I came along and I started in the organization basically putting labels on claims, and you couldn't get much more boring than that. Anyway, the typist was going away on vacation and they knew I could type. So they put me in that position. So I'm reading the documents as I'm typing, and I started asking questions all the time. And so I said, hey, this girl's smart, maybe because the the president of the company could never keep secretaries. He was very harsh on people, and they would come and they would fastly go after a week, 2 weeks, and there was high turnout rate. So he fired the current person while the typist was away. And they went in and said, well, this person's pretty smart, maybe okay. So suddenly I became an executive secretary out of nowhere. Okay, so I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And then they want me to take dictation. Anyway, the head of the company liked me a lot for whatever reason. I was good at organizing things on his desk and making sense of some stuff, so he liked me. Now, as he grew to like me, the VP got, I think, jealous of the fact that Jack liked me, and she began to hate me more and more every day. And my life became so miserable. I was sick on Monday. I got colitis working near that woman. Anyway, I had the opportunity to go to Europe that summer for 6 weeks. So I asked for a leave. She said, yeah, you can go, but make it known that you're not going to be working for Jack when you got back. And I said, fine, that's good. So I come back, and everybody's been fighting for me over those weeks to come work, and nobody could come. Anyway, I wound up being the receptionist at the desk. And Jack came in one day and he saw me sitting there and he said, what's she sitting there for? And he said, you come over here. And he just put his finger to his desk and she brought me back, and that unnerved that woman like no. So then I was empowered because Jack asked for me to come back. So there's leadership, there's power, there's fear, there's all kinds of things in that story. But, I have to say that my second time around was really pretty good and easy because that woman didn't threaten me anymore because I knew I was in like gold, and that was it. And I became an executive secretary, and he could say, hey, bring that paper in. And I knew based on whoever is in his office, which paper it was from which date. And so, it was a well-oiled machine there. And then I decided to quit to go to school full time. And I got a job with somebody that he was one of his colleagues, and he got pissed at me for not coming to him.
Right.
Well,
And
yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
All right,
there's
thank
the
you.
Story of
Thank-
intrigue in a
thank-
workplace.
Thank
So
you.
Joe, I have a
Yeah.
final word to offer to you all.
Please.
So I think what you probably what I noticed, and I think what you all noticed too, is that our stories about leadership, either the experience of serving in a leadership role, maybe even one that we never asked for, or relating to people who are in leadership or managerial roles, that they aren't that much about somebody being brilliant at using some particular thought process and making, some miraculous decision where they were prescient and they predicted the future and it all. They are things like, working with a team in order to create the right balance of vision and clear objectives, or, believing in people and giving them opportunities, or just in the way you're working in a daily way, showing people that you're really inviting them to step up. And when they're ready, you hope that they will. And that would be, Becky, somebody would say to you, don't show up one time and see what happens, and because that's what happened. And then obviously the sort of tailoring, which is really a part of actually empathy and respect and regard and trying to build agency in students, Allison, to be able to really treat them as people, as customers in a way, as individual people, is also, I think, what managers and leaders are trying to figure out right now as they want to actually keep, their best people. They're really reaching out to them in a personal way and saying, what do you need? What do you want? How can we make it work? Because they're scared to death that the people who actually have nowhere else to go are the ones who are going to stay. And the people who actually could go because they have the opportunity and the knowledge and the experience and the network and the attitude, that they're the ones who will leave. And the company will be stuck with the folks who can't get out. And so there's a lot of that going on, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in organizations or companies. And but this emotional intelligence and this sense of ethics, and even Lisa, what you were saying, do this in a way that we can be proud, you know, and Laura's story about how you were treated. It's all on that side, you know, it's all over there, even in a digital age. Shane Marie, did you raise your hand there? Did you want to add something to it?
Sure. I just wanted to say, either in the presence or absence of leadership, I think we all need to conclude about how we're going to engage with the world in every aspect, work and otherwise, and that we don't need to wait on others to recognize us, that we can contribute in whatever way that we can, and do it in conjunction with our sense of integrity and value and contribution. And I think, unfortunately, so many of us wait to be recognized or to be valued and those kinds of things, that we just have to agree, each of us, independently of leadership, to do what we can, where we are, and how we can. So that seems important to me.
And thank you for that. And thank you, Jeff, for another wonderful session. I just want to announce some of the upcoming meetups for 52 Living Ideas. We have in 4 minutes, deep conversations. If you're reading The Design Way, feel free to join us this evening for that. Tomorrow night is Enjoying Solitude and Other People, and that is the book Flow, and that is at 7 p.m. And tomorrow night is Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 35 to 51, chapter 2. Oh, I didn't know chapter 2 as well. And just check the website for this weekend. There's the Center for the Study of Digital Life. I don't know what our topic is this week, but it's a continuing series with Mark Stallman, and it's been one of our best series that we've been running. And I highly encourage you to join meetup. It's very, very good. I had some incredible insights based on last week and where China's headed. So,
Joe, I'll just add for all of you, one of the things we'll do 2 weeks from tonight will be to go further into this book, The Future Leader by Jacob Morgan, where he tells us what he learned from interviewing 140 CEOs from companies throughout the world. And I will put in the description of the program an invitation that I think we'll see. I think that everybody can do for free, which is a sort of a self-diagnostic little survey related to what he sees as the 4 mindsets and 5 skills of leading in a digital age. So if you wish to do that, just to kind of see what he thinks and you know, how we you know, what we can learn from it, I'll invite you to do that as well. It's not required, but I think since he's giving it away for free, you know, it might be attractive.
thank you, everyone, and especially to Jeff for another great session. And I look forward to hopefully seeing everyone in 2 weeks.
Great.
So
Take
care, everyone.
Yeah.
Tom,
Thanks,
Tom,
Jeff.
I will email you after I eat, okay? I gotta have dinner. So don't wait up, okay? You'll get it tomorrow morning.
Good deal.
Thank
Have
you.
a good
Tom.
evening,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jeff.
Take care, everyone.
Night.
Thank you, Jeff.
Really interesting.
Bye.